Hello everybody, welcome to Mystery Disappearance and Other Cases. Today we're going to take a look at Branson Perry, a young man who disappeared in 2001. So we're going back to the state of Missouri. While Sean Hornbeck disappeared in 2002 from his small town of Richwoods in the east of the state, more than 1 year prior, Branson Perry disappeared from his small town of Skidmore, which is in the northwest of this same state. Branson Kane Perry was born February 24, 1981. He lived in a small rural Missouri town by the name of Skidmore, a town of approximately 350 people at that time. Today this town has a population of about 240, so it has a consistently declining population. Branson was 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighed approximately 155 pounds. He graduated from Nottoway Holt High School in 1999. He was raised by his parents Bob Perry and Rebecca Clino. He also had a younger brother named Phil. Although his parents had been recently divorced when he disappeared, Branson lived with his dad in Skidmore and his mom lived 20 miles away with Branson's brother Phil. In spite of the divorce, the relationship between all these family members remained amicable. Branson seemed like your ordinary handsome young man with blonde hair, blue eyes with a friendly smile. He enjoys the typical things, sports, music, friends. Doesn't all this sound eerily similar? Joshua Guimond and Chris Jenkins had a similar profile and disappeared the following year. No connection of course, but are young blonde men cursed or something? Anyway, after graduation, Branson had attempted to join the military, but unfortunately, because of a heart condition known as tachycardia, which is a condition known for irregular and increased speed rate for heartbeats, Branson is rejected. He remains local, taking on jobs when he can, such as a roofer and work for a traveling petting zoo, although he was without work when he disappeared. In spite of his heart condition, he kept fit and even had a black belt in Hapkido, a form of Korean martial arts. Tragically, Branson Perry would disappear from his backyard on Wednesday, April 11, 2001. But before we get to that, let's back up a bit and take a look at Branson's week leading up to his disappearance. During this week, his father Bob Perry was hospitalized with an undisclosed medical condition that required surgery. Branson and his dad lived alone in their house, so Branson had the house to himself during this time. On Saturday, April 7th, his neighbor by the name of Jason Bierman invited Branson to chill and hang out at his house just next door. Jason was in his early 30s, about 11 years older than Branson. Branson was apparently given some drug and danced around naked in Jason's house. He supposedly shaved his pubic hair as well. Sadly, Branson would suffer a sexual assault at the hands of his neighbor. The details of the assault are unclear. We don't know if Branson was passed out or coerced. The reason we know this is because on Sunday, April 8th, Branson went to visit his father at the hospital in Maryville, about 14 miles away, 18-minute drive. It was after some surgery, and Branson, humiliated at what had happened, revealed to his dad about what happened at their neighbors. Bob suspected that his son was gay, but still, he didn't like the idea of his neighbor taking advantage of him. He planned to confront his neighbor once he got out of the hospital. A couple of days passed, and by Wednesday, April 11th, Branson was expecting his father to be home soon from the hospital that Friday, so he decided to get the house cleaned before, and he invited his friend, a young lady by the name of Jenna Crawford, to help him. Bob Perry's vehicle, which was still at home, needed a new alternator, so 2 mechanics came over that day to work on it. I suspect Branson and Jenna were experimenting with drugs that day as well, although I haven't seen this mentioned anywhere. By early afternoon, the radio was on, they were cleaning, and Jenna noticed Branson pick something up from a kitchen cabinet, then quickly rushing outside. She didn't think much about it at first, but would later recall this as an odd moment. She even asked him what he had picked up, and he simply shrugged it off and responded with nothing. Getting closer to mid-afternoon, Jenna stated that she took a shower, which I thought was a little odd. Why would she take a shower at a friend's house in the middle of the afternoon? Nevertheless, after she was done, she walks back to the kitchen and to her surprise she finds one of the mechanics seemingly rummaging through the cabinets, apparently looking for something. When she asked, "What are you looking for?" he simply responded with nothing, then hurried back outside to continue work on the alternator. By 3 p.m., Jenna was still in the house and looked outside through a window to see what Branson was doing. She asks him, "What are you doing?" He responds with, "I'm putting away jumper cables in the shed, then I need to run out for a bit. I'll be back in a few minutes." Branson Perry was never seen or heard from again. Jenna remains at the house, but Branson doesn't come back. She eventually decides to leave, thinking he's running an errand or has just been sidetracked. I'm not sure exactly what time Jenna left, but I will assume it was around dinner time. I believe the two mechanics were gone by the time she left, but if I'm wrong about that, write me a message in the comments. The next day, Thursday, April 12th, Branson's grandmother, Joanne Stinnett, goes to visit her son Bob at the hospital. She learns that Bob won't be leaving the hospital on Friday as initially planned. He will be there for a few more days. She asks if Branson has come to visit. He responds with no, surprised because Branson was coming to visit him every evening, but he was not seen the night before. They were not too worried yet, but Joanne dropped by the house to see if Branson was home. The doors were not locked, not the front door, and not the kitchen door that leads out back. It wasn't that unusual for doors to be unlocked, being a small town where everybody knows everybody. Some windows were open, some lights were on, the radio was playing, but nobody was home. She assumed that Branson had just stepped out for a bit. She then noticed that his wallet, his keys, and a recent cashed paycheck were left behind. To Grandma Joanne, this was not right. Again, note the similarities. 3 young men vanish, all of them didn't have their keys and wallets when they disappeared. I wonder if Josh Skidmore and Branson Perry did leave their wallets and keys behind, or if the perpetrator simply returned them as a means to confuse loved ones and maybe throw them off the track. Joanne starts calling around to see if anybody has seen or heard from Branson, but no luck. She eventually leaves the house. She tries to call over the next 2 days, but no answer. By Saturday, April 14, she calls Branson's mom, Rebecca Clino, who had not heard from Branson either. Both start calling everybody they know, trying to find Branson or information on his whereabouts. They also call Jenna Crawford, who reveals she did see Branson on Wednesday, but nothing since then. Bob has pondered the possibility that Branson had decided to skip town and take a break, and go meet some of his friends in Kansas City, maybe to unwind after the sexual assault he suffered. Bob Perry finally gets out of the hospital on Tuesday, April 17th, a full 6 days after Branson disappears. He meets Joanne and Rebecca at the police station to file a missing persons report. I don't know why they waited this long. They definitely should have done it sooner. As far as we know, Bob has never confronted his neighbor Jason about the sexual assault, but for the time being, he had more pressing concerns. At least the disappearance was taken seriously by the authorities. No BS about the young man has to be missing 24 or 72 hours before launching a search. A considerably intensive search is launched for Branson, with even helicopters circling the area. Branson was last seen dressed in size 32 shorts, a t-shirt, and a leather necklace with teeth or arrowheads. But in all the searches, there were no traces of Branson, not even the jumper cables that he was supposed to have put away in the shed. The authorities claim that over 100 people were interviewed within the next month or two of the disappearance, including Jenna and the 2 mechanics who were at the house that day. The interviews with the 2 mechanics yielded no results, claiming that they had not seen Branson walk to the shed nor leaving the property. They also interviewed Jenna. She would eventually reveal that she and Branson would sometimes experiment with marijuana and amphetamines, and this would steer authorities in a new direction. Although this was new information to family members, Branson had possibly developed an addiction which he hid from his family. Supposedly he was planning on going to a rehab facility soon, like in a few days soon. This deepened the mystery. Was Branson Perry's disappearance motivated by him ruffling some feathers in the underground drug scene? As small of a town as Skidmore is, there is apparently a considerable amount of drug use and circulation. Did he get in way over his head with an outstanding drug debt? Was he dealing drugs and somehow misplaced or lost a shipment or the money he was supposed to pay back, thus explaining his behavior of inconspicuously taking something from the cabinet and later one of the mechanics going through the same cabinet? The mechanic could have been doing double duty of fixing the car and could be involved in some drug operation. Or could neighbor Jason Bierman somehow be connected to a drug operation? He is older than Branson and might have been part of the drug scene for some time. Did he sense Branson would get him in trouble with the sexual assault? Or fear of Branson narking about the drugs he uses, or both? Jason might have asked his drug buddies to protect him by getting Branson out of the way. Once you get involved with these drug circles, it can be difficult to get out. Also, shortly after the disappearance, Jason apparently left Skidmore for 2 weeks. Coincidence? Supposedly, Jenna Crawford, Jason Bierman, and the 2 mechanics were given lie detector tests or polygraphs. Now, I've heard 2 different things when it comes to the lie detector tests. I've heard one account that these 4 all passed, But on another account, Rebecca Clino released a statement saying, "Several people were given lie detector tests. Some passed it and some didn't, but I was not given any detail." Now, many more people than these four were giving lie detector tests, including acquaintances of Branson in the town of St. Joseph who did or dealt drugs. So, it is unclear who passed the test and who didn't. There is no evidence that Branson had a drug debt, but who knows. Nevertheless, the authorities believe Branson's disappearance might be drug-related. As the authorities keep investigating, they discovered that a house located in the town of Quitman, 6 miles north of Skidmore, had burned down sometime after Branson was last seen but before his family reported him missing, possibly that Friday or Saturday. This house was supposedly a hotspot for many substance abuse and dealings. Investigators questioned neighbors and people living in this vicinity, and it is believed that a young man of Branson's description had been seen there shortly before the house was on fire. Nottoway County Sheriff Randy Strong is very convinced that Branson was last seen at this residence. I also should mention that the jumper cables that Branson was supposed to put in the shed were not found when the authorities did their initial search, but they were found in the shed 2 weeks after his disappearance. Could the authorities have missed them? This definitely adds to the mystery that the perpetrator or one of their accomplices returned it to cover up loose ends. Fast forward a couple of years later, in 2003, the case took an even darker turn. On April 10, 2003, a 59-year-old man by the name of Jack Wayne Rogers was arrested with various charges. A Presbyterian church minister and Boy Scouts leader, Rogers was charged with first-degree assault, practicing medicine without a license, possession and distribution of obscene material, some involving children. Prior to his capture, Rogers' behavior was pretty gruesome. He chatted online with a male-to-female transgender woman and offered to perform a makeshift surgery in a hotel room to remove her genitals, obviously her penis. Rogers kept the genitals, took self-pictures with them, wearing them on his head or in his mouth, and sharing these pics online. Rogers had no medical backgrounds or studies, probably just learned a few things just reading books or whatever. The transgender woman, named Madison, bled for many days and eventually found herself in the hospital to have it looked by real professionals. Authorities obviously seized Rogers' computer and found various chats about him claiming to have mutilated, sexually abused, and killed various men and boys. And get this, on one of his chat logs, he discussed how he kidnapped Branson Perry, that he found hitchhiking and welcomed him into his vehicle, and described in detail what he did to this young man. I won't go into detail, but it involves sex, torture, and murder. Obviously, this opened more than a few eyes. Rogers was exposed for the dangerous human being that he is. As family and authorities zero in on Jack Rogers, they try to find evidence of his involvement with Branson. Unfortunately, except for his obscene chat logs and a turtle claw necklace similar to what Branson was wearing, there was no concrete evidence to make a connection. Authorities couldn't determine if the necklace was indeed Branson's. Rogers has consistently denied having ever met Branson, claiming that his chat logs were mere fantasies. He claimed to have seen Branson's missing poster and conjured up stories and fantasies online about him. Even at Rogers' sentencing, Branson's mother gives a heartfelt mother's plea to Rogers to tell her where Branson's body is located. But again, Rogers denies any involvement. Rogers was sentenced to about 30 years for his other crimes, with his earliest chance of parole in 2028, but he will be in his 80s by this time. Not that that makes him any less dangerous, but... Rogers lived in Fulton, Missouri, which is 4 hours southeast of Skidmore, although it is possible that Rogers could have made that trip, but authorities don't seem to have any reason to believe that Rogers was in around Branson's location around that time. Ultimately, law enforcement and Branson's mom, Rebecca Clino, don't believe the convicted minister had any involvement in the disappearance. Rogers isn't off the radar completely, but the authorities turned their attention again to Skidmore and the drug scene. Skidmore has kind of become infamous for some very tragic events, though it is a small town where not too much normally happens, but the town does have a history of some tragic happenings. In 1981, a man by the name of Kenneth McElroy was shot in his truck in broad daylight. By all accounts, Kenneth was an evil man. He had been accused of dozens of felonies, from child molestation to assault to robbery to arson to statutory rape, the list goes on and on. He was also a stalker to people whom he felt crossed him, though there were no anti-stalking laws during this time. He was known as the town bully, and even had a relationship with a 12-year-old girl, married her to avoid statutory rape charges, and got her pregnant at 14. In what seemed like an organized coup, McElroy was shot in the head when he left a bar in Skidmore, his wife Trina sitting next to him in the truck. There were supposedly 46 witnesses, but nobody claimed to have seen anything. No ambulance was called, and his wife claimed to know who the shooter was, but nobody was ever charged. Law enforcement didn't go out of their way to investigate the murder, since McElroy was such a vile man. It proves how this town can band together and cover up a crime, so you got to wonder if the same thing happened to Branson. In other tragic events in Skidmore, in 2000, a man by the name of Greg Dragoo beat and strangled his girlfriend to death. This lady was named Wendy Gillenwater, who was actually a cousin of Branson Perry, and had the common grandmother of Joanne Stinnett. There are terrible tales here as well, such as Dragoo beating Wendy, then tying her body to the truck with a cord, and him driving around town, dragging her body. Townspeople witnessed this, but again, they don't get involved. It is unclear if this really happened or if it's just a rumor, but Greg Dragoo was sentenced to prison for the rest of his life for the murder of Wendy Gillenwater. In 2004, another cousin of Branson, named Bobby Joe Stinnett, was victim of a horrific crime. Actually, her husband Zeb Stinnett was the cousin of Branson, but she was his cousin by marriage. She was pregnant and chatting online with another lady who was supposedly pregnant as well. Ultimately, they met and this lady would kill Bobby Joe, steal her unborn child from the womb, and claim it as her own. Of course, she was caught soon after this, and tried and found guilty in 2007, and was executed in 2021. Amazingly, the fetus she stole survived, returned to her father Zeb, and she is alive and grown up today. So all this to say that this small town has been the site of many gruesome murders, leaving some people to wonder if the town is cursed. It's the stuff of nightmares. With a small town like this, you'd expect the family tree to be intertwining and dangerously close to each other. When I drew Branson's family tree, there is one thing that caught my attention. So we have Grandma Joanne Stinnett. She married 3 times and had 9 children total. She is mother of Bob Perry and grandmother to Branson. Branson had a cousin by marriage named Bobby Joe Stinnett, the poor lady who was killed and had her fetus stolen. Branson had another cousin named Wendy Gillenwater, the young lady who was victim of violence and killed by her boyfriend Greg Dragoo. And get this, it's been revealed that one of the mechanics working on the alternator of Bob's car was a man by the name of William Dragoo, or Bill Dragoo. The mechanics' identities were kind of a secret for decades, although I'm sure in a small town like this people could narrow it down. But Bill Dragoo passed away in 2021, and his name has been revealed since. And sure enough, when I looked at his obituary, Greg Dragoo is listed in his family members. So it would seem that Branson's cousin was killed by Bill's brother? Could there have been some friction between these families? I will state right now that I'm not 100% sure if the two Gregs are the same. But in a small town of less than 350 people, it seems like a good possibility. What gives me pause is that Greg Dragoo is incarcerated at the Jefferson City Correctional Center, but in the obituary it is simply written that Greg lives in Skidmore and has Andrea in parentheses, implying that he has a wife. So I'm not sure if it's the same Greg or not. Obviously, this is an obituary, so if a woman beater and killer is your brother, they probably don't want to draw too much attention to it. Maybe Greg got remarried in prison, with pen pal programs or whatever else, it could be possible. But if any of you know out there, please write in the comments if you know if this is the same Greg Dragoo or not. Bill Dragoo, the mechanic, could have had ties to the drug trade and might have facilitated or assisted in Branson's disappearance for whatever reason. Perhaps he didn't know that Branson would disappear or be killed, but afterwards he kept his mouth shut because he was an accomplice, willingly or not. This is all speculation on my behalf. A lead investigator by the name of Steve Whittington stated he always felt that Bill Dragoo knew something, but would never talk. The identity of the second mechanic hasn't been revealed, so I assume he's still living, and his name might only come out after he passes away. Sadly, Branson's father Bob Perry died in 2004 for an undisclosed reason. He died not knowing what happened to his son. Branson's mom, Rebecca Clino, passed away on Valentine's Day in 2011 from melanoma, a kind of skin cancer. Michael Kurtz, a New Jersey retired police officer who took an interest in the case, revealed that he and the Nottoway County Sheriff's Department know exactly what happened to Branson, and who was involved in everything. Ben Epsey, who was the sheriff at the time, revealed to Rebecca Clino what happened to her son right before she died. Sheriff Epsey supposedly knew everything 4 months after Branson's disappearance. He knows who was last seen with Branson, the culprits responsible for his disappearance and possibly death, but he can't prove it. Although civilians like us don't know the truth and probably a lot of details, it would seem like the proper authorities do, but without a body and any hard evidence, they can't bring charges to the people responsible. I would suspect that if you look at the higher-ups in the drug operation, you could probably know who the culprits are. Supposedly they all reside in Skidmore. It must be disturbing being the family of Branson and knowing his killer could live right next door to them. Grandma Joanne Stinnett has suffered through 3 horrific deaths of at least 3 of her grandchildren, all while living nearby the killers and or their families. Joanne herself passed away in 2016, so most of Branson's closest family members have all passed on, but he still has a brother out there, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, etc. Hopefully someday they will get closure and put an end to this tragic story. The case remains open today. But what about you? What are your theories about what happened to Branson Perry? Do you think authorities are right and Branson's death is related to some drug operation? Either because he was in debt or they just didn't trust this kid who wanted out, worried he would narc? Do you think Jack Wayne Rogers, a sex offender with cannibalistic and mutilating tendencies, somehow came across Branson and that was the end result? Rogers denies any involvement, but he would have nothing to gain from telling the truth. He was sentenced to 30 years, but if he was involved in Branson's death, he would certainly have gotten prison for life. Do you think neighbor Jason Bierman could be responsible? He felt like he could be in hot water with Branson after the sexual assault, and having ties to the drug community, he manipulated them under the pretext that Branson would knock on the drug operation or something. There are some who believe Jason might know what happened to Branson, whether he was involved or not. And what about me? What do I think happened? I'll preface this by saying my opinion doesn't matter. I'm not an investigator and I've never met any of these people, but just based on the vibe I get upon researching this stuff, I think the Nottoway County Sheriff Department is on point. They know exactly what happened to Branson. I totally get the we know the truth but we can't prove it scenario. I think Branson was set up that day, either by Jason Bierman, the 2 mechanics, or maybe all of them. Now, I don't necessarily believe that they expected this end result. They might not have thought Branson was going to get killed over this. I think they probably had some of their drug acquaintances tell them, we need to talk to this Branson kid, so make sure he gets into the vehicle that we send at 3 o'clock or whatever. They may or may not have known the extent of trouble Branson was in, so they complied, but then Branson disappears, and they couldn't really talk about it or reveal any information because they were accomplices, whether intentional or not. They were part of the drug circle in some fashion, and their own lives and their families' lives would be in danger if they talked. Maybe many people in Skidmore know what happened, but for their own protection they stick their heads into the ground and they don't ask questions. Don't ask, don't tell is probably the MO here. It's tragic that this young man lost his life in this fashion. Maybe he was naive and didn't know how seriously these drug dealers take their business. I still wonder what Branson could have done to ruffle these feathers to this extent. They must have somehow felt threatened by Branson, or he got in way over his head with the drug consumption and owed them a lot of money, but who knows. As I said with the Joshua Guimau and Chris Jenkins case, hopefully the truth will come out someday. Keep your eyes open everybody, and keep these stories alive.